This is the Outliers Edge podcast, where we champion the leaders who are shaping the next era of humanity by taking them to the edge of their comfort zone so that they can lead us to the edge of what's next. I'm your host, Niiamah Ashong. Let's do this. Why, hello there. Niiamah Ashong here, founder of Outliers Edge, where we champion the leaders who are shaping the next era of humanity. I say this out loud. It's so fun. I say this like to bring us into the conversation, but really to bring myself into the conversation. Right? There's a lot of things that are happening in life, and every time I come in and I remind myself, like, what are we actually here for? I feel something sink in even further. Mm-hmm. And then I get to like look at the person that I'm in conversation with, and that reminds me of just that extra level of, let's call it tremendosity, in the person that's there, shaping the next era of humanity. And there are a few people in my world who I think are doing that so directly, as Dr. Elaine Taylor-Klaus. Elaine, it's great to be in conversation with you. How are you today?
I am thrilled to be here with you today.
Yeah, it's thrilled. I'm thrilled to be in a space with you here. And what we'll have our conversation. There's some things that are on my mind, on my heart, around some topics that we've recently been talking about. So I'm like, like if we get to talk to Elaine, like I want to explore some of these. But the element of shaping the next era of humanity came up when I think about like the work that you do, and the impact like that it has. So like, would you mind really quickly just like sharing a bit about like the work that you do out in the world? And yeah, let's start with just like, what's the external part of it, and then most of our conversation will be on like our internal journeys and beyond from there.
I love that description as you said it. I'm like, yeah, wow, that is what we're doing. We're shaping the next era of humanity. That's so beautiful. So the work that I do, I'm the CEO of Impact Parents, and what do we do? I have so many descriptions. I help parents stay sane while raising complex kids, but really what I do is I bring a coaching mindset, framework, sensibility to parenting, conscious parenting, particularly parents who are raising kids who are struggling with life learning behavior, who are outside the box, who are often outliers themselves. These kids have this extraordinary capacity in their lives, and it's often squeezed out of them in the systems that we put them into, in the school systems and sometimes family systems. And so this is about inviting parents to do their work and to look at themselves and how they're being as parents consciously, to empower these amazing young people to really be able to fully express themselves in the world and reach their full potential. And I do this in the context of the medical arena in a lot of ways, because a lot of the people I work with have kids who may have a diagnosis, may be considering whether the kid needs a diagnosis. There's a lot of garbage around that notion of what is and is not a diagnosis. But for me, it's a boon, not a bust, because it gives us information. It helps us support these kids. But there is a medical model that we work within that again tends to squeeze kids and parents and families into boxes that don't work for these kids. And so a lot of what I'm about in the world is ultimately about changing the medical model and shifting it a little bit on its axis, not to undo it, but to just shift the framework so that we're empowering parents in the process of raising kids to be part of the process of being their kids' medical and emotional manager, and so that they can guide these kids to know themselves well enough to want to manage themselves. But to do that, the parents need to be empowered to see how important their role is in the process. So that was a long-winded answer to, I'm trying to change the world.
yeah. So let's catch that. Let's catch that. But like, it's so funny because like sometimes people be like, oh, that was a long-winded answer. That was a long thing. Like, this is your life's work right now. Like like if it takes you 2 minutes to explain the decades worth of what you have poured in, like not just what you do at work, but like you care about this.
Yeah.
Like, please take, like, as you were saying this here, it was like every 10 seconds, just so you know, my experience, every 10 seconds was something fresh for me, because I actually started out like asking you questions up here in the microphone, and I felt myself like relax so deeply into the seat that I like, it was just important. So that time period was incredibly important to me. Every time you talked about squeezing, I had just had a physical reaction, you know. I use the term outliers. I'm talking outliers, pioneers, trailblazers. It's a mindset that just goes to like, hey, apparently the way that either my experience or the way that I think about things is different than others, right? And not all the time, but like there's like in the times that matter to me, the way that I look at things, it's different. And the component here, as I've been talking to more and more people, it's like this element of like the squeezing of self into a system, the squeezing of self into a box, the dimming of self to like to not be as bright. All those things, that to me feels like this special place that when I think about what like the outlier world we're tapping into. So
yeah,
I have to just say, like, thank you for that, for just the introduction. You mentioned before we got on here, you said there'll be a time when the time is right, make sure to go and read my book. And I want to make sure we give some space to that, because as you're talking, I'm like, of course, like not just like, how do I say it? The amount of the excitement I have for the tools that I can leverage as a parent, and even just like the knowledge of things to look out for, or the resources that may be available for me. Like, I'm legitimately excited for the book. I know that you like, can you tell us the name of the book here, where we can go and find it? And then we'll just continue on in our conversation. But I want to make sure that gets some space as well.
Thank you. Yeah. So the book that I'm talking about, this specific book, is called The Essential Guide to Raising Complex Kids with ADHD, Anxiety, and More. Through the pandemic, I've been talking about a lot in terms of raising kids in complex times, because I think all kids are complex these days. But the Essential Guide to Raising Complex Kids is about how do we shift out of that traditional paradigm of top-down parenting and move into a collaborative style of parenting using a coach approach. And so the secret to the book is that I'm really kind of teaching coaching skills, not training in coaching, but foundational coaching skills and principles and concepts, so that parents can shift their style from directing to collaborating. And so that parents can have tools to shift the way that they're having conversations with their kids in a way that's more empowering and inspirational. I often say parents come to me in desperation, and I want to invite them to parent from inspiration. And this book, I think, gives them the tools. And the extra bonus of it is, if you listen to it on Audible, it was voiced by my eldest child. So,
oh, okay. So that's
fun too.
Yeah, that's a nice little bonus there. I'm an Audible reader myself, so like,
excellent. So
I'm like,
you can find The Essential Guide voiced by Bex Taylor-Klaus on Audible. And Bex, just so you know, is a professional actor, so it's not like I just hired my kid to read the book.
Yeah,
the publisher hired my kid to read the book.
I like that. I like that a lot. I like that a lot. So there's a couple of different things that like. There are conversations that I've been wanting to have with you here. Awesome. You talked last time we spoke around like something around ADHD and coaching. You're like a lot of like you brought in like there's let me put it this way. I know what I'm saying. I've been having amazing conversations with people who at some point in the conversation they're like well, I have ADHD and I was recently diagnosed, you know, and it's like, and it's so funny for me because like in my experience as a coach, I'm like, okay, like let's keep moving, right? But apparently something is working with the way that I am being with you and the way that like you be with yourself, you know. And so you brought up like your experience there and such. I was just like, I get curious about like the differences, the nuances, the opportunities, the way to dance and play. I'm kind of like, what am I doing that is working? Because I don't know. I'm just in space with someone and being with someone, and later on, they're like, this usually doesn't work with people, but for some reason with you, it does.
Sure.
And so, yeah. So like, I'm actually coming in here as someone who's seeing some things that are working without actually being able to pinpoint anything. And I'm just like, oh, I'm really curious what it is that you may know, because it felt like you have like a lens as you're going through it.
Well, it's super timely for you to be asking me that, because so we're recording this in this moment at the end of August of 2022. Mm-hmm. I have an article coming out in Choice Magazine in 2 weeks on neurodiversity, inclusion, and coach training. And I'm doing a presentation for the ICF in October on neurodiversity, inclusion, and coach training, because I've really started to realize that there are a lot of coaches out there who don't understand enough nuances of neurodiversity. And by that, I mean ADHD, anxiety, depression. There's a lot of variations of executive function, trauma. And we're talking probably 30 to 40% of the population. And so we're all, as those of us who are coaches, supporting people with neurodiversity. But when we don't have that awareness, or when they don't have that awareness of themselves, I have seen a lot of damage done and a lot of harm done when we assume that a client's not following through. So therefore, they must not be committed, or they must not really care, or they must not, know how to hold themselves accountable. When we come from that place of judgment, which we often do unintentionally, we're reinforcing a story that they've been getting all their lives, that I'm not good enough, and if I could just try harder. And when you are a human with neurodiversity, it's not about trying harder, it's about working smarter. And so you have to understand how your brain works to learn how to navigate it. And that may mean having conversations differently. It may mean planning differently. It may mean setting yourself up for success or accountability differently. By understanding it, you can change the way you be. Knowing you as I do, you have a way of being with people that meets them where they are, without judgment and shame. And that is probably the most foundational piece. And I'd like to say that all coaches do that, but you and I know that all coaches also happen to be humans, and we all have our stories. And so I think sometimes we do as a coach. I mean, and I've had early on in my career, I remember somebody not showing up or not following through. And I don't want to go to, I must not be serving them as a coach. Mm-hmm. So then I go to, well, something must be off with their commitment. And as I learned about neurodiversity and executive function, I understand that their commitment can be powerful and strong, but that doesn't necessarily mean they know how to get themselves to do what it is they're trying to do. In fact, that's one of the markers or the symptoms of a neurodiversity like ADHD is I know what's expected of me. I just can't figure out how to get myself to do what I know I want to do. That's a marker. And that fundamentally, coaching is a unbelievably powerful vehicle for supporting with people with neurodiversity, if we understand that neurodiversity is there and how that's showing up. If we don't, it can actually cause damage.
Yeah, I appreciate this from a couple of different perspectives. I still want to explore with you here. I know you're going to be talking a lot about this here, so hopefully you don't mind talking just a bit more.
No, I'm thrilled to be talking about it. It's great.
Yeah, no, it's interesting to me because when you say this, it takes me back to, like, sometimes I ask myself, I'm like, how did I end up in this seat? Like, like why am I not still working in consulting or working in tech? And how did I end up like doing this work? And it takes me back to about 2006 when I was in college and I took a behavioral economics class. And it was like one of the most interesting, I was an econ major, it was one of the most interesting classes to me because I got introduced to like the idea that like we might think that we're rational and yet at the same time like we are doing all these irrational things, right? There's a wonderful book I think by Dan Ariely called Predictably Irrational, and it talks about like these things that we think that we're in choice around, but there's actually a lot more other factors that are taking place. And it got me curious about like, why do humans make the choices that they do? Like, why do we have the behaviors that we do? And then most importantly for me, I'm like, how do I get either the motivation, or how do I actually execute against what it is that like I feel? Because when you were describing like, you know what to do, but not necessarily how to do it, I'm like, oh, do I feel you on that? And around me, lots of things get done, you know?
Yeah.
But there's something in what you're describing that almost feels like my stance in the world, which is like, there's a way that it works for you. Let us let us find that, let us see it, let's celebrate it, and let's value it. There's like if you can do that and capture that and translate that out into the world, there are people who will benefit from your process or the way that you do it, you know?
Well, but so here's what's so key to that. There's so many things. I want to
please
go back to motivation. I want to talk about ambiguity, but on that last piece, what's really key, part of the challenge in the neurodiversity world is when the coaching world or the consulting world says, here's how you do something. Great. This works for me. This is going to work for you. And when you have neurodiversity, just because it works for you doesn't mean it's going to work for me, or vice versa. And so the really most important thing to supporting people with neurodiversity is to help them figure out what their process is, and not to just give them a process and say, okay, this process works, use it. The typical example I use all the time is when you give a whole bunch of kids in a class, you give the entire school a planner. That's great for 60, 70% of the kids for whom a planner works. But it stinks for the 30 to 40% of the kids in the school for whom a planner is not their best vehicle for capturing assignments and knowing what's expected of them and by when. Now, I know most of us would say, well, but it's a calendar and it's a structure and it works. And it does for 60 to 70% of the kids. And so what's so key here is to really personalize and individualize, and to help people figure out what their process is, instead of just saying, here's a process, you should use it. As parenting, in the realm of parenting, this becomes really challenging because parents see what the kids should do or need to do. He just needs to do this, which is how the parent would do it. But that doesn't necessarily mean that's how it's going to work for their kid. So understanding what does work, what doesn't work, what shuts them down becomes a key factor to helping people develop the processes and systems that will work for them. So ambiguity is a great example. I'm doing an interview later with a guy named Jeff Copper from Attention Talk Radio. He's a dear friend of mine, amazing professional in this realm. And he figured out that ambiguity for people who struggle with executive function, and let me just clear because I've said that term a few times.
I was going to ask about that. I was like, it has presence. Executive function has entered the room. Let us define it. Let us be at least on the same page in this conversation.
So it's that part of your brain that differentiates us from animals. It's the part of the brain that thinks, feels, and acts. It's the frontal lobe of your brain. It's the part that makes us really human. Our critical thinking, our emotion regulation, everything happens in the frontal. Anything we do happens because we have a frontal lobe, the executive function of our brain. It's the orchestra leader of our brain. And when people struggle with executive function, which is what happens when people have any kind of neurodiversity, and again, that could be anxiety, that could be trauma, that could be ADHD, shows up in a lot of ways. Could be a power dynamic at play. When the executive function is not kind of firing on all cylinders, people struggle with different aspects of, and we could go down a whole rabbit hole of going into the 6 areas of executive function, or 12, depending on how you look at it. But let's just say that our ability to set a course of action and follow through to completion is impaired when executive function is challenged. And so, for example, whether I have anxiety or ADHD or whatever it is, I know that I'm supposed to pick up the phone and call the doctor's office to schedule an appointment. But if it's ambiguous to me, I don't know who's going to answer the phone. I don't know when appointments are going to be available. I don't know when my calendar is going to be available. I'm not sure if I'm going to have somebody to drive me. I'm not sure what the cost is going to be. And I'm just choosing one example from life, right? If I know there's something I have to do, but I have so many questions that are unanswered about it that are ambiguous, that ambiguity can actually shut me down and prevent me from taking action at all. Now, when I'm calm and clear and my executive function is in full gear, I might be able to call and figure out what questions I have and hang up and call back. But if I'm in any way agitated about it, it's likely to shut me down. Same thing with completion. One of my kids said to me once, "Don't you see, Mom, if I haven't done it, I haven't done it wrong." So perfectionism and that ability to get it right. If I can't get it just right, I might rather not do it. Those are ways in which people who struggle with neurodiversity or executive function can seem to be undermining themselves, when the truth is that if we help them get to the core of what's standing in their way, what their obstacle is, then we can help them create problem solve for themselves. So I want to come back to motivation, but let's stop for a minute.
Yeah, let's pause, because there's, as we're talking, it's almost as though you're shining a light on some of the ways that I think about being with people.
I can imagine that. Yeah.
Yes, I'm like to me, when you're talking about, I'm like, this is what a roadmap of meeting someone. And I approach it with, like, whoever you are, like, what is your element, like, so I approach it a little bit more just like ubiquitously, right, as I think you do. But there's something in here around, like, when you're saying this, I'm like, yes, oh, this makes sense. So I have a couple of different questions. I'm keeping note of those questions, so we'll come back and we'll dive in, because I'm like, what you'll find with me is I want to understand what it is that you're sharing. And then in my mind, I'm thinking about the practicalities of it, and the practicalities of it, not in terms of how do like, what is it like to implement, what's step one, step two, it's not that, but like the reality of like someone's world around them, as they are, like, if they're like, yes, everything Elaine said is correct. Let me read the book. Let me show you the pages. Let me do all these things here. And the rest of the world is not on the same page as them. So I want to get to those are some of the questions that are in my mind. Let's get to that in a bit. I think we need to talk about motivation first, though. So can we bring in that? Yeah,
I'd love to. So motivation is one of those things I hear from parents all the time. My kid's not just motivated. We hear from employers all the time. My employees aren't motivated. We've got this, quote, great resignation where we're wondering if anybody's motivated. And the truth is, we're all motivated to do whatever it is we're doing every moment of every day. The question is, what's driving the motivation and what it's motivating us towards. So we teach a framework called pinch. So when people are challenged with executive function, one of the things that happens is that motivation is not enough. It's you have to find the motivator. Yeah. So you have to figure out the process, but you also have to find the motivation to do almost anything. It's not enough to so I don't mean to say motivation is not enough. Let me state that differently. Saying just do it is not enough. You have to find the motivation. So if I'm an adult with ADHD, I don't have a just get it done button. I can't just put it on a list and it's going to happen because it's on my list. Now, my business partner's like that. She can just push through. I need to find a motivation to do it. I need to find something to compel me to do it. I need the synapses to fire, the serotonin and dopamine to kick in. I need my brain to fire to get me to do stuff. And I'm a stimulation seeker. So there are 5 key motivators for complex brains that can really help when people are struggling to find motivation. Okay, you ready? The acronym is PINCH, P-I-N-C-H. P stands for play. And in that realm is also creativity and humor. And so I do a lot of work with parents. So I'm going to reference kids in this because I think we can all kind of relate to it. So these are the kids who do really well with 1 minute math and you got a timer, or who you put a basketball hoop over their laundry hamper so they can throw the clothes into the hamper and all of a sudden they're putting their clothes in the hamper, right? So some element of play. Gamification's become real big in the world these days. That's because people are strongly motivated by play. Even though we try to kind of train it out of them as we domesticate humans, the truth is, the more we can connect to play, the better for a lot of people. And in that realm with play, I also put humor and creativity. So whether it's artistic or writing, whatever creativity, programmatic development, whatever is creative expression for people. And humor is a really powerful motivator for a lot of people. If I can ask my son to do the same thing with a joke in my voice versus sternly, I'm going to get different results because he's highly motivated by play. So P is play. I is interest. And, these are the kids who will work for one teacher, because they love a subject and they shut down when the teacher is, Bueller, when you've got a teacher who's not engaging, or when the subject's super boring. So some of us are highly motivated by interest. I hear from parents a lot, some variation of, he'll only do what he wants to do, or she won't do it. She won't do it unless she wants to. Right. That's because she finds it interesting, and interest creates, some good dopamine, serotonin hits to get your brain activated. It's all about activating the brain.
Okay.
So play, interest.
Mm-hmm.
N is novelty seekers, stimulation seekers, shiny object. I could have a system that works great, and after 6 months, I'm bored. I'm going to change the system up. Doesn't matter how well it works, right? These are kids who are motivated at the beginning of the school year because there's new shiny pencils and notebooks and teachers and classrooms. And if you don't change their class in January or September to a new class, and you're in the same class all year, they're going to start shutting down at some point because there's not enough novelty and change. So a lot of people are really motivated by innovation, change, creativity in that realm. So novelty. C is competition. Some people are super motivated by competition, maybe competition with others, maybe competition with themselves. Some people are not. So we have to be careful of this one. Not everybody is motivated by all of these 5 in the PINCH acronym. So a lot of people with anxiety are not motivated by competition. So we really want to be careful. I've begun to sort of play with it as C as both competition and collaboration, because some of us are more motivated by collaboration than competition. Mm. And then the H is the last one, and that stands for hurry up. And that's urgency. And what's happening there is actually we're relying on a different part of our brain. So PINC, we're relying on the frontal lobe. Urgency, we're actually waiting for that last minute to get something done, for the amygdala to kick in and get some hormones kicking so that we can get going. So the people who wait to the last minute to start a project or a paper or to leave or whatever are waiting for a different part of the brain to kick in together. I wish you guys could see Niiamah's face because he's just cracking up.
Some of these things are going to be done by video. It's going to be all over the place.
I'm
right?
so glad.
Yeah.
So PINCH, play, creativity and humor, interest, novelty, competition and collaboration, and hurry up or urgency. Those, if you can tap into any of those motivators, it will help you find more success in following through with what you're trying to do. How's that?
Oh, wow. I started smiling because I'm like, there were just so many of these that I just like really like that. I was like, oh, that really identify with this. I'm grateful for you right now. I'm grateful for you in a couple of different ways. And I'm also curious about these as well, right? Because you shared the 5 key motivators. I know that the context that you look through things is like through parenting, like primarily, or let's say like I think primary is where I'm going, like first, right?
And also for ourselves as adults.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And like as you're describing this here, I think about this from the standpoint of, like I say, I work with Outliers. Again, it's a mindset that I choose to do. It's a term that I've chosen to use, and I allow people to decide if they want to take on that term or not, right? But the component of motivation, until you laid out these 5 like key motivators for me, like I didn't realize the different levers that were actually available to be pulled. And as I'm listening to this here, for me, I'm like, yeah, like for me, I'm like, yeah, this is what you need in order. Like, if it's not interesting, if I'm not if there's no, I could see myself in every single one of them, and I don't think that's unique in that regard. But I could also just see the freedom in being able to pull on various levers at different times, where it's like, actually, I was interested in this, and like being down on myself, like I was interested in this. Why, wasn't this was supposed to be the thing? I can't be seen as a jack of all trade, or I'm not able to follow through on anything here. And it's like, oh, well, you know what? Honestly, the novelty of it has worn off. Like, it was interesting. It was interesting because it was new. It wasn't like inherently interesting for me, you know?
Correct. That's beautiful awareness.
Yeah.
And again, some people are motivated. I mean, we talk about intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation. And, there are people who are motivated by doing the right thing or because it's expected of me. But I wonder how much of that is motivation versus maybe obligation or a feeling of compulsion. And that's another conversation, but true motivation, there's got to be something pulling you towards, compelling you forward instead of pushing from behind.
Oh, right. So like when you say this, you take me back to my time working in a tech company. I was working in culture, and our head of people, he would go through and he's like, when we do anything, I want to be looking for the pull from people, like where people are pulling us versus pushing us. And in the context of that was like, don't just go out there as HR and say, or the people team and say, this is what y'all need, or like, this is what's working that best in the industry, so on and so forth. It's like, just listen to what people want and then give them that. And as you're doing that, find out some of the best things in the industry and make it the best thing that's there without leaving out what it is that they're asking for. Hit what they're looking for and make it better through all the other things that you have.
Yeah. So in the realm of positive intelligence, and they've done a ton of research on this, Shirzad Shamin talks about pull energy versus push energy. And pull, when something's pulling you towards it, I look at it as inspiration, right? You're inspired towards. And push energy is so much harder, and there's more should in it, and it tends to feel more desperate. So pull energy has a lightness to it.
Yeah, I like that. And you're talking a little bit about like motivation versus what like obligation. It doesn't feel like an aside to me, because like in the absence of pinch, right? Like I would have looked to, okay, let me just feel obligated toward until like, because that like maybe that will move me forward. And there's elements about what you're saying that just essentially offer a new way, or at least different paths to be able to get to the results that we're looking for, right? And that's what I'm feeling.
Well, and I guess what comes up as you say that, Niiamah, is there's a positive way and a negative way. I used to say, there's a nice way to say that and a not nice way to say that, right? There's a positive way of moving towards, which is empowering and uplifting of the human spirit. And then there's this negative way that's driven by shoulds and compulsion and obligation. You may get there, but the energy around it can feel beaten down or squeezed, going back to the beginning.
Okay, so now I have to ask this question here. We have a few more minutes before we end for today, but firstly, just thank you all. My interest is really piqued. I need to find out a lot about this here. So I mentioned earlier about like the practical side of things here, and when I think about practical, it's not like what's the step-by-step component. I don't do things in a step-by-step order. It's within the context of, let's bring in pinch, within the context of helping them discover, you mentioned like the key here is helping them discover what their process is and actually having them use that process. What came for me was like the immediate pushback that I heard in my head was it was multi-level, right? The first one being as the person themselves that's going through this here, to be able to say, like, can I trust my own process? Do I trust myself? Like, the experts or everyone else says it's this here, like, is it actually okay for me, like, to use the process that actually works for me?
Mm.
So I felt that I'm gonna put in like maybe 2 or 3 different scenarios, and then I'll let you choose because it might be the same solution for all of them. So let me put it out here. The next one was really around like partners and peer leaders here. So I'm thinking about this from a parenting standpoint, but as well as like being in an organization and wanting to create a way to work with your team that like actually balances out or pulls in more of the components of like the processes that work for them. However, the organization itself is not like they're like, we have our standard operating procedures, we have these things here. Like, that's like, from a leadership perspective, that's not what good leadership is. Like, you should be telling them what needs to get done, so on and so forth. So I guess, like, I'll be curious for you, like, how do you recommend, like, there's an element of like when you are good with trying to bring out the process either for yourself or with others, how do you like navigate the environment around you that may not that may not actually be receptive to it, just based on the conventional norms and the systems that we're in?
Yeah. So a lot of examples are coming to my brain. I'm trying to kind of figure out how to respond. There is what we know about people's engagement and achievement and accomplishment and all of that, is that the more buy-in we get, the more ownership people feel, the more successful they're going to be, the more accomplished they're going to be, the better the team's going to operate. And whether that team is a business place or a family or whatever, when someone feels a sense of ownership, it translates to execution, typically. So I'm thinking about one client I was working with, and I do work predominantly with parents, and I also work with executives and in a variety of different ways, sometimes because they start off as parents and then we start working on the business after that. But one woman I was working with, who was working in an office place, had identified that she had adult ADHD and was really struggling with the noise in the workplace when she had, this is back pre-COVID, when she had certain work products that she needed to deliver, and she needed a different level of focus and attention, and she needed to be able to tune out the world. And so we were coaching around advocating for herself and going to ask for permission to use a conference room, which in some office places, it's like a no-brainer. Sure, it's there, go use it. And in her particular office place, she needed permission. She needed to get it assigned. And so she actually needed to go to her supervisor to get permission to be able to use a process that worked for her so that she could produce at the level that she wanted to produce. She had to know herself well enough to know, I need to be able to tune out the noise. It's not enough to put on noise canceling headsets and people still interrupt. I'm thinking about another example and this is just about interruption. So this is going a different direction, but in the medical arena, one of the ways that we significantly reduced one staff of nurses significantly reduced unintentional mortality in a hospital was when the nurses got together as a group and began to recognize that what was happening was, while they were filling people's meds, they were getting interrupted. And so the system they agreed to put into place was as simple as, when they wore a specific apron, they were wearing that apron to put people's meds together. And the message to anybody around was, do not interrupt while I'm wearing this apron. And it reduced all mortality in that hospital by a very significant margin. I'm not a good numbers person, so I don't remember the details. But that became a standard of care and a standard of practice. It happened because the people who were in it came together and said, the practice we've got isn't working. What do we need to do differently? they owned it, they saw the benefit of it. So I may have gotten a little off my own course, but that's what's coming to me, is that it's about ownership of process, that process for the sake of process means nothing. The point of process is to create an outcome. And so we really want to we focus a lot in our work on process over outcome. If we hold people accountable to the steps in the process and to tweaking the process to work, we're going to achieve those outcomes. But if we only hold them accountable to the outcome, but they don't know how to get there, you're going to get constantly frustrated by not achieving the outcome or the results.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. When I think back to the intention behind my question, it was like an element of like, but the world, like I want to do what you're saying, but the world is scary, and the world like doesn't like take this in. Where like so how do I navigate that? And as I was hearing through your examples, what was coming for me was that level of deep ownership of like, if you know that this is like that you're on a team, you're here to get a result, you're you're here to come to an outcome, and everyone's on the same page. And for you, this is what is necessary, or for whatever, like for the person that you are leading, what like you want to create the environment to get the result. What I was hearing from you, some of the things I took from there was like, get good with that. Get clear on the fact that like the process is incredibly important. Yeah. It's not just a byproduct. It's not just a thing. It's like, it is important.
Yeah.
And then when you're anchored in that and you own that, that then gives you agency to go and have the conversations you need to. If it's requesting the permission from the supervisor, if it's going out and saying, hey, we brought everyone together and now we want the entire hospital system, not just one or two people, not just this doctor, like we need to do what it takes, because like to make sure everyone in this hospital system respects this from every single floor in every single room, so that we can save people's lives, or exactly. Actually, so we don't put their lives at risk unnecessarily.
Yeah, exactly. And there's a process, seems like such a simple thing, and process has got to be a living and breathing thing. When we're in workplace environments, the world is constantly changing, and so we talk about what I call the magic 3 questions: what works, what's not working, what do we want to do differently? And no matter how good a process is, we always want to be looking at, is there room for tweaking? Is there a need for change? And maybe that everything's working, but if we're not open to it, then we're not in a place where we have the capacity to change it.
Oh, I really appreciate that. I'm going to say one last thing on that, and then I think we'll start wrapping up this conversation here today. Because the other question that was in my mind was like, okay, help them discover what their process is. I like, from the work that I've done, I'm like, it's not necessarily easy to help someone see what their process is. You know, it's like it's a big statement that's in there. And what I just heard from you in the 3 questions was actually one of the ways that could come out. The idea of like taking a look at it and asking yourself those 3 questions. Can you remind me what those 3 questions are?
What works? What doesn't work? What do we want to try differently?
Yeah. I found like in the environments where I've either applied it to myself or into like different team environments, we start to see like over time, we start to see what consistently keeps working and what consistently does not work.
Because you can map it, right?
Yes.
I had a teenage kid take the experience of planning a spend the night party and map it over to how does she figure out how to get her homework done? Because she knew what worked, and then she was able to apply it to a different domain. So
I'm getting goosebumps because I'm like this is to me, you're talking about like the essence of something that has felt very true within me. So I need to go deep on what it is that you're describing here, because I'm like, oh, this has been figured out. Let me now just do this with a higher level of mastery, and I'm very excited about that. Elaine, thank you for bringing your mastery on this, and also thank you for continuing to develop and grow your mastery. I'm like, you've been dedicated to this, and you keep evolving. You keep finding new areas. You keep finding new things. And I really respect you for it, and it's something that like excites me to say like, wow. if there's a mission, if the mission's large enough, I can keep finding different things within it to keep growing in. So just know I really respect you. I'm very grateful for you here. If someone, there are people who want to continue this conversation with you in some way, shape, or form, what's the best way that they can reach out and continue from there?
So there's a lot. Thank you. First of all, I've thoroughly enjoyed it. I appreciate it. There's a lot of resources available at impactparents.com. There's free guides and downloads. If you go to impactparents.com/guide, you can get a free chapter of my book. And that's probably the best way to kind of get a sense of who we are, what I'm about, and what I'm bringing to the world. So impactparents.com/guide is a great resource.
All right. Absolutely wonderful. Well, Elaine, I'm thoroughly just grateful for you. I've enjoyed this conversation. You've connected some dots inside of me. And I just think you're absolutely tremendous. So thank you so much for spending the time here. Thanks for being in the conversation. Thanks for bringing you.
We're just getting started. Take 10 seconds to think about your greatest insight from today's conversation. And if you're ready to go and bring this to a deeper, more applicable level for you, come and join us in an upcoming masterclass. Go to outliersedge.com/masterclass to be coached live and to bring your aspirations, your goals, and your challenges and have them handled in real time. This is high flame, high impact, high transformation. Go to outliersedge.com/masterclass and come experience your next level of leadership.